Viewer discretion is strongly advised. What you're about to hear is based on the raw accounts, the whispers from the shadows, and the chilling narratives that surfaced when the walls began to crumble. This is for education and awareness, pulling back the curtain on a world many only see from the outside. Nobody saw him coming. The names whispered before him: Cassie, Will Smith, Monique. They set the stage, yes, but when Ice Cube walked through those courthouse doors, the air changed. A man who built his empire defying the system was suddenly walking right into its heart, not as a defendant, but as a witness. He wasn't chasing headlines or chasing fame. He was there to speak. And what he carried with him, the documents, the stories, the connections, froze the room. This wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about an entire machine, an underground network of power, control, and things far darker than most could imagine. The stories that had circulated for years, involving names like Jamie Foxx, Oprah Winfrey, Quincy Jones, they now had a voice confirming the terrifying whispers. And that voice belonged to Ice Cube. It was supposed to be a typical day in court. The usual buzz, the cameras, the shuffled papers, lawyers projecting calm they didn't feel. Then the doors swung open. No fanfare, no security bubble, just Cube. Folder in hand, eyes forward, moving with a quiet, heavy purpose. The room went still. You could see the shift, jurors straightening, the judge pausing. Diddy, initially avoiding eye contact, finally looked up, and the color drained from his face. "I wasn't called," Cube stated, his voice steady but carrying the weight of decades. "I asked to speak." There was no performance. This was testimony that felt like it had been held inside, simmering beneath the surface of hip-hop history for 30 years. The very first words, they hit like a shockwave. "Some of y'all didn't realize I'm not part of the club, and that's what pissed them off." Silence. Deep, absolute silence. He wasn't speaking as O'Shea Jackson, the actor. He wasn't speaking as Ice Cube, the rapper. He spoke as a man who'd navigated the treacherous waters of an industry, watched others swim, sink, or get pulled under. He spoke about the club, the one everyone knows exists but nobody names out loud. The gatekeepers, the insiders, the ones who smile for the cameras but hold the strings behind the scenes. "They don't want you in because they like you," Cube stated, his gaze firm. "They want you in so they can control you. And the moment you refuse, that's when it starts." He gestured slightly towards Diddy, who seemed unable to look away. "That's when the whispers begin. The canceled meetings, the quiet bad press, the manufactured scandals, the phone calls you never even know were made." The courtroom was hanging on every single word. Cube said he'd witnessed this pattern unfold countless times. Genuine talent, real artists, drawn into the orbit, offered a glimpse of the kingdom. Then came the demand. Submit. They want you to sign the paper. They want you to play the part. And if you don't, they make sure you don't work again. He didn't just say Diddy was in the club, he was running it, pulling the strings, enforcing the rules. Cube paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. The judge offered a break, but Cube declined. He turned back to the jury, his expression unwavering. "You want to know why I'm here?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Because they tried to break a man I respect." The next name sent a jolt through the room. "Jamie Foxx." The pen stopped. Every single eye swiveled. Cube recounted how it started, the way it always does, with the illusion of camaraderie, the seemingly casual invitations, the exclusive parties, the sudden phone calls from people you never thought would have your number. Jamie was on an unstoppable ascent. His talent undeniable, his energy infectious. And that's when they circled. "First, it's flattery," Cube explained. "Then it's favors. Then it's control." He told the jury, his voice steady, that Jamie had confided in him more than once. Carefully, quietly, fearfully. "They bring you in like family," Cube said. "And if you play along, they call you brilliant. But if you don't..." He let the silence fill the space, the unspoken consequences hanging heavy in the air. Cube testified specifically about the infamous basketball parties, the strictly enforced no phones rule, the fleet of black SUVs arriving and departing, the strange assortment of guests. It wasn't just basketball, he stated. It was a test, a vetting process. They watched. They observed. They wanted to see who would obey without question, who would challenge, and most importantly, who would protect the secrets. He said Jamie, always smooth, played along on the surface. He laughed it off. He stayed polite, but he never fully surrendered. And that's when the rumors started, Cube revealed. Suddenly, Jamie is painted as too difficult. Suddenly, his health becomes a public question mark. Suddenly, he's absent from major headlines, but popping up in the most insidious gossip blogs. Cube's voice dropped. The 2023 medical emergency, that wasn't coincidence. That was punishment. A warning shot fired, disguised as a health complication. He claimed Diddy's inner circle weren't just throwing lavish parties, they were building comprehensive archives, cameras rolling where you didn't expect them, footage capturing moments you had no idea were being recorded. And once they had it, they kept it, and they used it. Cube told the jury about a phone call he received from Jamie Foxx after one of Diddy's events. He didn't share the explicit details, but he conveyed the impact. Jamie was shaken. "Cube," Foxx had told him, his voice tight, "I can't talk about it, but I can't unsee it either." If the courtroom thought they had heard the most shocking part, they were wrong, because the very next name out of Ice Cube's mouth sent a ripple of disbelief through the room. Oprah. "It wasn't just Puff," he said, his voice gaining a new edge. "There are layers to this, deeper connections." Cube explained that during the peak of Jamie's career, right after Ray and before the massive Oscar buzz, Jamie received a phone call, a quiet one, from Oprah Winfrey herself. Her message? According to Cube, she told Jamie, "You're blowing it." Jamie, expecting congratulations, was stunned. She wasn't calling to praise him, she was calling to redirect him. She told him he needed to get his life together. Then came the chilling part. She told him she was taking him to see someone who could help. That someone was Quincy Jones. Cube stated to the court that he didn't need to introduce Quincy Jones. Everyone in Hollywood knows the name, but Cube claimed Quincy was more than a celebrated producer. He was a shadow figure, publicly revered, privately feared. She brought Jamie to Quincy's house like it was an intervention, Cube testified, but it wasn't about healing, it was about submission. He told the jury that Jamie described that night as one of the strangest experiences of his life. It felt, Jamie said, like he was being prepped. Not helped, trained. Cube made it starkly clear that what happened at Quincy's house that night was never fully explained by Jamie. Some things were too difficult to articulate, but the look in Jamie's eyes when he tried, that was enough. And then Cube leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Oprah called it responsibility. Quincy called it legacy, but what they were really handing him was a leash. Cube alleged that after that meeting, Jamie Foxx began to change, not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to. He told me, "Cube, the only way to stay alive in this game is to pretend." And I watched that man pretend for years. He paused again. But now, nobody's pretending anymore. Ice Cube stood tall, unflinching, as he introduced the next level of this alleged network. "Quincy Jones," he said slowly, letting the name hang in the air. "Ain't just a producer in this town, he's a godfather." The courtroom was utterly still, not a sound. "This ain't gossip," Cube stated, looking directly at the judge. "It's truth, and it needs to be on record." He explained that for decades, Quincy's name was whispered backstage, behind closed doors, held up publicly, deeply feared in private circles. And what he did to earn that fear, that was the part people only hinted at in coded lyrics or oblique interviews. Cube leaned forward slightly. "You don't get as powerful as Quincy without making deals," he clarified. "And I'm not talking about record deals or movie deals. I'm talking about soul trades, the kind of arrangements that don't come with signed contracts, just control." He testified with conviction that Jamie Foxx's interaction with Quincy wasn't a happy coincidence or a spontaneous mentorship. That meeting, allegedly facilitated by Oprah Winfrey, wasn't casual. It was, Cube claimed, a deliberate handoff. Jamie was being passed from one handler to another. The room remained utterly silent, captivated by the unfolding narrative. "He told me later," Cube recounted, referring to Jamie, "Cube, it wasn't advice he gave me, it was instruction." According to Cube, Quincy presented the meeting as guidance, as passing on wisdom. But Jamie, sensitive and intelligent, knew the true nature of the exchange. "It felt like being processed," Foxx allegedly said. "Not helped, processed." Cube told the jury that he had heard similar stories from other men in the entertainment industry. Men who had mysteriously faded from prominence, whose public personas drastically shifted overnight, or who had sudden, quiet breakdowns and were never heard from again in the same capacity. He alleged that Quincy Jones operated with charm and charisma, but his underlying message was identical to Diddy's: comply or face the consequences. "Do what you're told," Cube summarized, "or we'll make sure you never work again." He then introduced something even more disturbing, a layer of darkness that felt ancient. Cube claimed he had seen old photographs, private photos, passed around discreetly among certain circles over the years. Photos, he emphasized, that should never have existed. And in these alleged photos, Quincy Jones was always present, often in the background, smiling. But the people in the photos? They weren't smiling, Cube stated, his voice flat. He told the court he couldn't verify every single image he'd glimpsed or heard about, but the pattern was undeniable. "Quincy's not just a mentor," Cube declared, "he's a middleman, and the people he answers to, we still don't have names for them." The implication hung heavy, a network far larger and more hidden than just the figures being discussed. Cube then shifted his focus to the tools of control, the chains that allegedly kept people compliant for decades. "I want to talk about how they keep you quiet," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Because it's not just fear, it's blackmail." He told the jury that Diddy's immense power wasn't solely derived from his wealth or influence. It was crucially in what he kept, an alleged vast repository of secrets: the footage, the tapes, the compromising moments collected over decades, amassed from parties, recording studios, private jets, hotel suites, all allegedly cataloged, organized, and meticulously saved. "They don't just invite you to a party," Cube stated, looking towards the prosecution table. "They record you at those parties. You want to know how many people stayed quiet over the years?" He challenged. "Ask how many people got a flash drive in the mail with no return address." The images this evoked were chilling. Ask how many got a phone call from a blocked number playing back audio of them doing something they don't even remember agreeing to. He continued, his voice rising slightly with indignation. Ask how many promising careers suddenly vanished after they said no. Cube asserted that Jamie Foxx was far from the only one. He claimed personal knowledge of at least 2 other prominent actors who had been compromised at one of Diddy's notorious events. One of these actors, Cube recounted, had called him in a state of panic. The actor allegedly couldn't recall anything past midnight at the event. He woke up in a hotel room with a mysterious contract laid out on a table and disturbing photos on his own phone that he hadn't taken and didn't belong there. Cube described the alleged system. Once they had that leverage, you were no longer truly free. You belonged to them. "That's why so many people smile through it," Cube explained. "That's why they post the pictures, laugh in the interviews, walk the red carpets like everything is perfectly fine." Because he alleged if they didn't, the archive was unlocked. The secrets were weaponized. He testified that Diddy himself often didn't need to issue the threats directly. He had an entire ecosystem to do it for him. Publicists, journalists, studio executives, stylists, people seemingly unconnected, but all allegedly part of the network. "You won't hear it from him," Cube stated. "You'll just feel it from everywhere." And when someone dared to try and break free, to distance themselves, that's when, according to Cube, the machinery turned on them. Suddenly, the gossip blogs would explode with negative stories. Old dormant cases might be mysteriously reopened. Long-buried rumors would be revived and spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the target is labeled unstable, unreliable, difficult to work with, a professional risk. Cube claimed that Jamie Foxx was subjected to this exact smear campaign the moment he started pulling away, creating distance. "Suddenly he's got health problems," Cube said with clear skepticism. "Suddenly there are whisper campaigns that he's not reliable, that he's losing his mind." Cube's voice held a note of defiance. "Nah." He paused. "He was freeing himself, and they do not like it when you run." Cube's voice softened slightly, becoming heavy with the weight of the story. He adjusted the microphone stand slightly, looking out at the faces of the jury. The air in the courtroom felt colder now, thicker, as if the sheer volume of alleged dark truths was consuming the oxygen. "I went to one of them," he revealed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just once." He explained it happened sometime in the early 2000s. It wasn't a widely publicized event. No flashy flyer, no press release, just a quiet, discreet invitation. a name, a specific time, and a car waiting outside his hotel, sent specifically for him. They said it was a networking night, Cube recounted. That's what they always call it. He described arriving at a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills. The gates closed behind him. His phone was immediately taken at the door. And when he stepped inside, it wasn't a party, Cube stated flatly. It was an operation. He described the scene. Low, ambient lighting, no loud music, just quiet conversation and an unsettling atmosphere. Security personnel positioned subtly but clearly at every turn. And the most chilling detail? Rooms that weren't labeled, Cube said. Just doors. Some slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of something. Some with strange, muffled sounds emanating from behind them. He recognized some of the attendees, major A-list celebrities. Some looked detached, dazed. Some, he said, looked visibly terrified. And then he saw something that was permanently etched into his memory. I saw a man I admired, Cube testified, one of the biggest names in the entire game. The man was slumped on a couch, eyes wide open, fixed on nothing. And a camera, Cube stated, his voice heavy, was pointed right at him. Cube said he didn't hesitate. He turned around, didn't say a word, didn't ask questions. He simply walked back towards the entrance and got back into the waiting car outside the gate. The very next day, he received a phone call. The number was blocked. The message was brief. All it said was, "We saw you leave." Cube told the court that nothing further ever came of it. No threats, no repercussions he could directly tie back to that night. But he never went back. Because I knew what it was, he stated, his voice firm. That wasn't a party. That was a trap. He looked directly at Diddy, his gaze unwavering. You didn't just ruin lives, Cube said. You filmed them first. At this point, the judge had to call a brief recess. Reporters in the gallery were visibly affected. Diddy's lawyer leaned in, speaking urgently into his client's ear, but Diddy remained motionless, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. This time, the cameras were not his. By the time Ice Cube had reached this point in his testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom had fundamentally shifted. It no longer felt like a routine legal proceeding. It felt like a confessional, a moment of reckoning. Even Diddy's legal team seemed to understand the depth of the impact, their objections dwindling. The damage, it appeared, had already been done, but Cube still had more to say. They didn't just try to silence Jamie Foxx, he stated. They tried to erase him. He explained to the jury that in the upper echelons of Hollywood, silence isn't a polite request. It's an actively enforced state, achieved through relentless patterns of pressure and through surgical, precise attacks designed to make it look like someone simply faded away, slipped off the radar naturally. But behind the scenes, according to Cube, it was a calculated dismantling. After Jamie Foxx began deliberately distancing himself from those parties and that inner circle, Cube alleged, things started happening. Roles that Jamie was reportedly confirmed for, suddenly gone. Rumors, fabricated or amplified, began popping up everywhere. One day, Jamie Foxx is a universally acclaimed legend. The next, he's being painted as unreliable, difficult, problematic. Let that word hang, Cube said, allowing the loaded term to resonate. Problematic. It's code. He paused. It's code for he said no. Cube then produced a document, holding it up for the jury, a printout detailing a schedule, a calendar of planned meetings, projects, and bookings for Jamie Foxx spanning between 2019 and 2021. The jury initially looked puzzled by the seemingly innocuous printout. Then, Cube used a pen to highlight a series of entries, cancellation after cancellation, back to back. All he claimed tied directly to executives, producers, or companies with verifiable connections to Bad Boy Records, Revolt TV, or one of Diddy's numerous satellite enterprises. Coincidence? Cube scoffed softly, a sound of deep skepticism. Not a chance. He meticulously described how projects Jamie had initiated for platforms like Netflix were allegedly stalled or pushed back indefinitely. Scripts he was set to produce suddenly became mired in impenetrable legal entanglements. Collaborators he had worked with harmoniously for years suddenly stopped returning calls, vanishing into the industry ether. And then, Cube said, his voice dropping, adding a layer of somber certainty, came the health scare. He looked down for a brief moment, collecting himself before continuing. You really think that was natural? He challenged the prevailing narrative. That a man like Jamie, in peak physical condition, just suddenly collapses during filming? The questions hung in the air, rhetorical but potent. That it happens right after he started making noise about what he saw, about what he experienced? Cube didn't explicitly accuse Diddy or his network of causing Jamie's medical event, but the implication, heavy with the weight of his testimony about blackmail and punishment, was unmistakably clear. I don't know what happened in that hospital room, Cube stated, but I know fear and I know retaliation. His voice grew stronger. And that wasn't just a medical incident. That was a message. Cube alleged that Jamie Foxx was being punished not only for what he had witnessed or potentially spoken about in private, but fundamentally for what he refused to become: a pawn, a compliant mouthpiece, a tool to be wielded by the network. He claimed Jamie was offered multiple opportunities to re-enter the fold, to come back into the good graces of the powerful. They allegedly offered him lucrative roles. They offered him carefully orchestrated press campaigns designed to redeem his public image. The price of admission? Simple. Smile, shake the right hands, and act as if absolutely nothing untoward had ever happened. But Jamie refused, Cube stated. He wouldn't play the game anymore. And that, according to Cube, was when they escalated their efforts. That's when they tried to replace him. His next words addressed a bizarre phenomenon that had captivated the public. That's when the clone rumors started. That's when people started genuinely asking if he was even still alive. Cube explained the strategy behind this. That's what they do. They deconstruct you, piece by piece. They chip away at your identity, your credibility, your very existence, until even your most loyal fans don't know what's real anymore. Is it him? Is it not him? Cube's voice dropped again, the weariness of decades in the industry palpable. That's how they keep their power. He paused. Not just with fear of what they'll do to you, but with the threat of erasing you, making you disappear from public life, replaced by speculation and doubt. There's something y'all need to understand, Cube said, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, locking eyes with the jury members who were leaning forward, completely absorbed. This ain't about music. He shook his head slowly. It's not even about parties. It's about culture engineering. He looked towards the prosecution and then, surprisingly, towards the public gallery. They don't just control what you hear on the radio or see on screen. His voice was measured, deliberate. They control what you believe, what you fear, what you think you should become. Cube painted a picture of Hollywood, or at least the part allegedly controlled by this club, as a finely tuned machine. A system expertly designed to take aspects of identity, experiences of trauma, expressions of rebellion, and weaponize them. Then, according to Cube, they package it, glamorize it, and sell it back to the very people those experiences belong to, presenting it as authentic entertainment. You think it's all freedom? He challenged. All raw expression? Nah. A wry, almost sad look crossed his face. It's scripted. Every major album they push, every blockbuster movie they fund, it's by design. He paused, then delivered a line that resonated with decades of hip-hop history and social commentary. The same people who push prison music own the prisons. That quote, Cube explained, wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was, he alleged, one of the fundamental truths Tupac Shakur tried desperately to warn the world about. Before, Cube added pointedly, Tupac became too political. Before he started asking uncomfortable questions about the true power brokers in the industry. Before he was silenced. Cube testified that Diddy, in this alleged system, wasn't merely a participant. He was a carefully selected conduit, a public face handpicked to embody and glamorize the very lifestyle, the very values that Cube argued were actively destructive to artists and the culture they represented. And anyone who dared to deviate from the script, anyone who didn't fall in line, according to Cube, they were systematically shut out. You rap about building something positive, you get shelved. He spoke with frustration. You talk about healing, you get labeled corny, out of touch. Cube even made more specific, chilling allegations. He claimed that artists known for incorporating spiritual themes or explicitly anti-industry messages into their work had faced mysterious obstacles. their studios allegedly raided, their digital devices mysteriously hacked, hard drives wiped or corrupted, their financial accounts frozen without clear explanation. The message, Cube stated, was unambiguous. The club didn't just want you entertaining, they wanted you obedient. He circled back to Diddy's infamous parties, reiterating his claim that they were far more than just lavish social gatherings. They were, according to Cube, vetting rooms, controlled environments where artists were observed, assessed, and tested, often on camera. And if you demonstrated willingness to play along, to go along with whatever transpired, you were rewarded, you were protected. But if you showed reluctance, if you stepped even slightly out of line, you got framed, Cube stated. Or you disappeared. He referenced a well-known female singer, a rising star, who allegedly refused to sign with Bad Boy Records after receiving an invitation to one of Diddy's parties. Within months, Cube claimed, her career imploded. She was publicly painted as erratic, unstable, dropped by her label, and quietly removed from consideration for award shows and major events. You think that was her just being erratic? Cube challenged the jury. Nah. He shook his head slowly. That was punishment. Cube looked back at the jury, his eyes meeting theirs directly, and he delivered perhaps the most damning statement of his testimony, something nobody else had dared to voice so explicitly throughout the proceedings. "Y'all sitting here trying to figure out what Diddy did," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "But the question you really need to ask is, how many people helped him do it?" And in that single, powerful moment, the trial, which had been focused tightly on one man, expanded. It became a mirror held up to an entire system, demanding accountability not just from the alleged architect, but from everyone who Cube claimed had enabled, facilitated, or stayed silent about it. The judge, recognizing the conclusion of his primary testimony, asked if he had any final words to offer. Cube nodded. He stepped deliberately away from the witness stand, walking towards the center of the courtroom, positioning himself to face not just the judge or jury, but directly at Diddy, who remained seated, pale, and rigid. "You built a kingdom," Cube stated, his voice strong, filled with cold conviction, "out of other people's silence." Diddy didn't move. His eyes were locked on Cube, unblinking. "You called it success," Cube continued, his words cutting through the silence. "But it was slavery?" He wasn't shouting, but his voice carried immense weight. "You didn't just throw parties." Cube's gaze was intense. "You created prisons, emotional ones, psychological ones." He gestured, encompassing the space between them. "And you filled them with people who thought they were being celebrated, but were really being captured." He then turned slightly, addressing the gallery, the reporters, the unseen audience beyond the courtroom walls. "To every artist watching this," he said, his voice softening slightly, becoming an appeal. "To every kid dreaming of making it in music or film, ask yourself who's standing at the door of that dream, who's holding the key, and what do they expect from you before they'll even consider letting you in?" He took a deep, measured breath. "I stayed quiet for a long time." His voice was tinged with regret. "Because I thought I had to. Because I thought staying quiet made me safe." He paused, letting the truth land. "But you know what staying quiet does?" He turned back, looking at the jury members, one by one. "It makes you a collaborator." He opened the plain manila folder he had carried with him throughout his testimony. Carefully, he removed a single, slightly faded photograph. "This," he said, holding it up for the court to see. "This was me in 1991. He held up the image of a young, hopeful Ice Cube. Bright-eyed, believing I could actually change the game, that I could make art, without losing my soul. He looked at the photo for a moment, then slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. The sound echoed in the silent room. "That version of me," he stated, his voice flat, "didn't survive." He looked up, his gaze hard, directed at Diddy and, implicitly, at the system he represented. "But this version," Cube said, his voice ringing with newfound freedom and power. "The one who came here today, he ain't afraid of none of you anymore." He walked back to the witness stand, placing the two halves of the photograph gently onto the table beside the folder. He looked at the judge. "I don't know what you'll do with all this," Cube said. "But now, you know." His gaze encompassed everyone in the room. "You all know." He faced Diddy one last time, the full force of his testimony culminating in this final exchange. "And you?" Cube stated, his voice low but carrying absolute finality. "You thought nobody would talk, that you had it all locked down, controlled, silenced." A small, almost imperceptible smile played on Cube's lips. It wasn't a smile of humor, but of profound, hard-won truth. "But now," he said, his voice clear and strong, "the door is wide open." He stepped down from the stand, walked slowly past the gallery, past the buzzing reporters who dared not speak, past the astonished faces of the jury. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge anyone. And just as he reached the exit, the heavy courtroom door waiting, he turned his head slightly, offering a final, lingering statement that hung in the air long after he was gone. "They didn't kill Jamie," Ice Cube said. "They didn't kill me." A beat of silence. "They just made us louder." And with that, he was gone. But the echoes of his words, the weight of his testimony, the chilling picture he painted of a hidden world would remain forever.